Imagine finding something that just kicks everything, right out from under you. Not just a little nudge, but a full-on seismic shift. Something that makes all the history books, all the philosophies, all the religions suddenly feel like they tell only half a story, or maybe even the wrong story entirely. That's what a certain kind of evolutionary discovery would do. It would completely rewrite human history. And it wouldn't be some small bone fragment or a new species of ancient ape. It would have to be something big, something undeniable, something that proves we were never alone, not in the way we always thought. What if we found proof that another intelligent, tool-making, language-using species, one that was not human, evolved right here on Earth? And what if they built a civilization? And what if they lived and thrived for hundreds of thousands of years, maybe even overlapping with our early ancestors before they vanished? This isn't about aliens from space. This is about another branch on Earth's tree of life, a branch that grew its own fruit of consciousness and culture completely independent of us. Think about that for a second. Another intelligent species, born of the same planet, but not us. Let's call them the Viridian. Not because they were green, but because the first real, undeniable proof of their existence came from incredibly well-preserved structures found deep within ancient, petrified forests, looking almost like they grew from the Earth itself. The discovery itself was almost accidental. A new deep drilling project looking for geothermal energy in an ancient, geologically stable region hit something hard, something unnatural, hundreds of meters down. It wasn't rock. It wasn't metal that made sense for our geology. It was an incredibly complex, resilient, organic composite material, unlike anything we knew how to make, or anything nature usually formed. And then they found more, not just material, but structures, intricate, geometric forms, flowing and angular at the same time. They were clearly built, clearly designed, and they were ancient, very ancient. Initial dating put them at roughly 700,000 years old, plus or minus a bit. That's a time when early humans were just starting to get a real handle on stone tools, maybe fire. We were not building cities. We were not drilling hundreds of meters into the earth. The first human team to descend into these vast subterranean chambers reported a silence that was different. Not just a lack of sound, but a feeling of profound absence, of something truly vast having been there. The air itself was perfectly preserved, dry, cool, and everywhere there were structures. In buildings, but not like ours. They were organic, grown somehow, or engineered to mimic growth. They glowed faintly with some internal luminescence that had faded but left residues we could analyze. And then they found the artifacts, tools, but not of stone or metal as we knew them. They were sculpted, intricate, made of materials that seemed to combine the strength of ceramic with the flexibility of advanced polymers. They fit perfectly in hands that were not human. There were what looked like communication devices, strange organic screens that held faded patterns and glyphs. There were works of art, delicate sculptures, reliefs carved into the living rock of the chambers, depicting creatures that looked vaguely like highly evolved reptiles or amphibians with large, intelligent eyes and surprisingly dexterous limbs. These creatures were the Viridian. They found their skeletons, too, not many, but enough to piece together a picture. The Viridian were bipedal, standing maybe 1.5 meters tall. Their heads were large, housing brains estimated to be significantly larger than ours, relative to body size. They had large, perhaps light-gathering eyes and a complex skeletal structure that suggested incredible agility and strength despite their slender build. Their hands had more digits arranged differently, allowing for incredibly fine manipulation. Their bodies were covered not in fur or scales, but a smooth, resilient skin, perhaps capable of subtle color changes. The geneticists were the next wave in. They managed to extract viable DNA from the bones, and what they found was astounding. It confirmed the Viridian were a completely separate evolutionary lineage from mammals. Their closest relatives were indeed ancient amphibians, but they had taken a wild, independent path for hundreds of millions of years. They evolved a complex nervous system, consciousness, and culture entirely on their own. They were truly Earthborn, but utterly non-human. This was the moment, this was the discovery that tore down the walls. We weren't the only ones. We weren't the first ones. We were just a way, not the way. The initial global reaction was pure chaos. Disbelief, denial, rage, wonder. It hit every single facet of human existence at once. Scientists initially struggled to reconcile it with existing theories. Every anthropologist had to go back to school. Every archaeologist had to reconsider every dig site. The timeline of life on Earth, the very definition of intelligence, all of it, was suddenly up for grabs. And then there was the religious impact. For faiths that centered on humanity as the pinnacle of creation, or as specially chosen, this was a direct challenge. Sermons were given, dogmas were re-evaluated, some fractured. Others embraced it, saying creation was simply more wondrous and diverse than we had imagined. But the core narrative of many faiths was shaken to its foundation. The first few years were a frenzy of research. Teams from every country scrambled to the discovery site, which quickly became the most guarded and studied place on Earth. Linguists worked on deciphering the Viridian glyphs and patterns, trying to understand their language, their history. Engineers studied their organic technologies, trying to reverse engineer materials that defied our current understanding of physics and biology. Biologists studied their unique physiology, their genetic code, seeing how another intelligent path had been forged. What they started to piece together was mind-blowing. The Viridian had a civilization that lasted for perhaps 500,000 years. They built not just underground, but in immense, living structures on the surface too. Structures that had long since decayed or been reabsorbed by the biosphere, leaving barely a trace. Their technology wasn't based on metals and fire like ours. It was biological, organic, grown, and cultivated. They harnessed energy directly from geothermal vents, from photosynthesis, from living organisms, in ways we barely understood. Their art told stories. They depicted a rich, complex culture with social structures that seemed to value cooperation and communal living. There were signs of scientific inquiry, astronomy, mathematics, all expressed in their unique glyphs and patterns. They had a deep connection to their environment, shaping it, but also living in harmony with it. Their art showed a profound respect for the web of life, a reverence for the natural worlds. And they were peaceful, at least for much of their history. There were no obvious signs of warfare, no weapons caches, no fortifications. Their society seemed built on understanding and balance. This alone was a stark mirror held up to human history, which is so often defined by conflict. But then, they vanished. The ruins showed a sudden, abrupt end, no signs of a slow decline, no gradual abandonment. One day they were there, and the next they weren't. What happened? This was the chilling question. There were theories. A catastrophic natural event, a supervolcano, an asteroid impact, a rapid climate shift that their organic technologies couldn't adapt to. Or perhaps an internal catastrophe, a biological experiment gone wrong, a self-inflicted wound from a technology we couldn't comprehend. The most unsettling theory, of course, was contact. Contact with us. Imagine finding subtle signs that early Homo sapiens or Homo erectus had indeed encountered the Viridian. Not in a war, not even in a clear meeting, but maybe early human myths of strange, wise beings living in the deep forests or under the earth weren't just myths. Maybe some ancient cave paintings that depicted figures unlike any known animal or human were actually rough renderings of the Viridian. The thought that our ancestors might have lived alongside, or at least been aware of, another intelligent civilization, and that knowledge was lost or simply dismissed as folklore was a profound and unsettling revelation. The concept of human history, as taught in schools and universities and popular culture, just evaporated. We weren't the first. We weren't the sole inheritors of Earth's intelligence. We were just one player in a much larger, much older drama. This discovery brought an overwhelming sense of humility. For generations, humanity had viewed itself as unique, special, the pinnacle of evolution, the only creature capable of abstract thought, complex language, art, and science. The Viridian proved that wrong. They proved that intelligence can evolve multiple times in multiple forms from completely different starting points. It wasn't a fluke, it was a potential. This humility led to a reevaluation of everything. Our place in the cosmos, our understanding of other animals, our own moral standing. If intelligence could arise in creatures so different from us, what did that say about the potential for life elsewhere in the universe? The search for extraterrestrial intelligence went from a hopeful quest to a near certainty. It made the universe feel much less lonely, but also much more complex. Ethical debates exploded. If the Viridian were capable of such thought and culture, what did that mean for our treatment of other species on Earth? Were we missing subtle forms of intelligence in animals we considered mere instinct-driven creatures? The lines between animal and person began to blur, leading to radical shifts in animal rights movements, conservation efforts, and even how we studied and interacted with non-human life. The world had to grapple with this new truth. It was a loss, in a way, the loss of our specialness. But it was also a gain of perspective, of wonder, of a vastly expanded understanding of what life could be. Governments, once focused on national interests, suddenly had a shared global project understanding the Viridian. The secrets of their organic technology, their advanced material science, their apparent ability to live sustainably for so long became the most valuable knowledge on Earth. There was a desperate race, not just to understand them, but to learn from their apparent mistakes, to avoid whatever fate befell them. The philosophers had a field day, or perhaps a century of days. What is consciousness? What is the purpose of intelligence? If two species can develop it independently, what does that say about its fundamental nature? Is it an inevitable outcome of certain biological complexity? Is there a universal drive towards it? These questions, once theoretical, now had empirical grounding. Art and literature were profoundly impacted. New narratives emerged, exploring themes of parallel evolution, lost civilizations, the fragility of existence, and the meaning of being one among many. Science fiction writers had to completely rethink their entire genre, as the alien other was now literally under our feet. Even our daily language shifted. Phrases like Viridian wisdom or Viridian peace entered the lexicon, representing an ideal of sustainable, harmonious existence that we now had a tangible, if lost, example of. The most profound shift, though, was in our self-perception. We were no longer at the apex of a single linear ascent. We were part of a mosaic. Our journey was not the only journey. This forced us to look at our own history, our own conflicts, our own unsustainable practices with a new, critical eye. If the Viridian lived for 500,000 years in balance, and we've only had industrial civilization for a few centuries and are already facing global crises, what does that say about our intelligence? Were they smarter in ways that truly mattered? The very idea of progress was re-examined. Was our technological path, with its reliance on resource extraction and environmental alteration, the only, or even the best, path? The Viridian, with their bio-integrated approach, presented an entirely different paradigm. Their buildings were alive, their tools were grown, their energy was harvested sustainably. It was a different kind of progress, one that we desperately needed to understand. And the mystery of their disappearance hung over everything. Was it an unsolvable riddle, a warning from the deep past? Or was there a key, something in their history, or even our own, that could explain it? The fear that we might be walking down a similar path, towards a similar unknown end, was a constant, sobering presence. This discovery wouldn't just rewrite history books. It would rewrite every human heart. It would force a deep, uncomfortable, yet ultimately liberating introspection. It would make us question our arrogance, our assumptions, our very definition of what it means to be human. We would become humble inhabitants of a much grander, more mysterious planet, a planet that had nurtured not one, but at least two intelligent species. And in that humility, perhaps, lies our true potential for a wiser future. The world would never be the same. Humanity would never be the same. It would be a world forever changed by the ghost of a civilization that lived and died before our story truly began.